bulbous goddess figurines, emphasizing the fertility of the mother, the large breasts, large buttocks, large belly. So this was during a period of time that many theorists in this area consider that the origins of paternity was unknown, and so that this enormous fecundity of the mother was something miraculous to these early people. So you can say that in some ways the goddess worship is almost as old as the history of Homo sapiens themselves, that date back to about 40,000 BCE. And these figures have been found going back to 25,000 BC, possibly 30,000. Then in the Neolithic, which is the period of about 10,000 BCE up through the Bronze Age in about 2500 BCE. You've got the beginnings of agriculture in 10,000 BCE, and then the whole advent of goddess worship takes on yet a more enhanced period as the discovery of agriculture, which is so phenomenally changes the lives of these people at this time, becomes associated with the fertility of the female body, and the business of planting the seeds into earth, the earth mother who brings forth, and this thing that was, truly revolutionary in culture, which is the discovery of agriculture, that's considered to have taken place approximately 10,000 BCE. And then these whole cultures in the Mideast and Europe, that in Çatalhöyük in Turkey, and the ones that Maria Gimbutas has excavated in the Balkans and Greece, where she has shown that these cultures were basically pacifist, sedentary, agrarian, and goddess worshiping. And the culture that we're going to look at today, Crete, is perhaps the most evolved of these cultures, but it's specific to this period of the Neolithic. It just happened to have survived longer. Now, around 4000 BCE, you already have what's called the advent of patriarchal religions, as early as that, where tribes of peoples called the Indo-Europeans, who apparently originated as the Kurgan peoples in the steppes of Russia by the Black Sea, suddenly moving down through Europe and east also towards India, and conquering the indigenous peoples. And it's considered to be these peoples that brought the advent of patriarchal religion, with an emphasis on horses, chariots, warfare, Zeus, the thunder god, the emphasis on the sky god rather than this Mother Earth figure. And so the indigenous peoples were conquered, and their religions were changed, and you have then an emphasis on the father god. Now, some of the things that are associated, why did these patriarchal religions spring up? Why the shift in emphasis from the mother deity to the father deity? And it's considered that, along with this, image of the goddess or god, then goes a corollary shift in the social structures. One strongly held belief is that, again, the discovery of paternity would have a really, mind-blowing effect on people. And I, for one, believe that, that sort of the rise of the patriarchal consciousness would be possibly somewhat similar to the sort of outrage of feminists currently at the notion of, our history has been suppressed, blah, 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 that it would have this kind of real fervor associated to it. So that's one view. Another is that it was a shift then in the livelihoods of people from agriculture to this nomadic herding populations with emphasis on male roles. Another view is that Marx and Engels hold is that there was some kind of a desire springing forth at this time for private property, and that is associated with the origins of patriarchy, and that yet another view, Rudolf Steiner has a more kind of a mystical view that it was just time for the evolution of consciousness to shift, that the early matriarchies of prehistory had emphasized tribal consciousness, communal tribalism and collective ownership of property, and that the shift away from this towards personal ownership and the development of the individual ego, as opposed to just getting your sense of belonging to a group and, we are all one. People not necessarily having as much individuated ego functions as is considered optimum today. So in any event, for whatever reasons or for a conjunction of all of those and yet some others that I haven't mentioned, this radical shift took place over thousands of years. And now, looking at it now, if it began as early as 4000 BCE, then we've had, and then, through over periods of thousands of years, so that the change in Crete took place around 1450. Now, you could say that we're possibly at the end of the patriarchal period now, in approaching the year 2000, or 6,000 years of patriarchy, and we've got what the Hopi called koiana skotsi, or world out of balance. And I think that some of what can be traced to the unbalanced nature of our society and ecology, it can be directly traced to the imbalance of patriarchy. And so that's why presumably studying these ancient cultures is just not some sort of dusty, arcane interest in prehistory, taking something off a shelf and putting it back up there, but that these principles are directly relevant to the really charged needs of our time, which is so suffers from the blight of nature and the threat of nuclear war, which again, the other thing that to me is so valuable about studying all of this is that I think that these cultures provide an opening on some real needs that we have. For instance, it's considered, well, warfare, I'm sorry, this is just in the nature of man to have wars. It's just the history. All of history will show that we've always had warfare. That may be true of history, but if you go back into these eras of prehistory, you can see that there have been thousands of years of pacifist agrarian communities. Thus, it is possible, when prehistory is unburied as such, we can see that the dimensions of humanity for peaceful coexistence and communal ownership and all these kinds of things are really, these are possible goals of humanity, and so that these kinds of things become other than some kind of, oh, it's a miracle, or it's impossible, this would be too utopian, this is not in the nature of man. It actually can be proven to not be so. It's, it is possible, and presumably, in the sort of spirit of Dorothy Dinnerstein, who wrote The Mermaid and the Minotaur, that as some of these, say, principles from prehistory and as women become more involved in the institutions of our society, that these things can become more nurturing, more holistic, more humanized, and that there would be a totally new, hopeful viewpoint brought into being that is, as I say, not just viewed as purely utopian and hence unrealistic, that this is all actually, in my opinion, can be shown to be kind of grounded and possible in the whole scope of things. And specifically then I'm referring to the pacifism and the kind of collective non-hierarchical societies. And just to, before I get into talking about Crete, Edmund Whitmont, who wrote Return of the Goddess, which this conference is sort of named after, I guess, he has said that the return of the goddess, the return of the feminine at the end of the patriarchy is in basis the messianic liberation that people, have been presumably looking for throughout the ages. It is the arrival, the quest of the Holy Grail, the age of Aquarius, which is the water barrier, again, the image of the feminine as the container, the vessel. The vessel of transformation. And the term apocalypse actually means to reveal that which is hidden, to unbury that which has been buried. And really, it is the goddess and these early eras of prehistory that have been buried. And so, again, one can view this kind of knowledge and of prehistory as kind of apocalyptic in its referrals for what humans are capable of.
Where are you marking history and prehistory?
About the invention or beginnings of writing, which is maybe about 2500 BCE.
That recent? 2500?
Yeah. So,
BCE.
Okay, I use that term. It's actually a term that's used in Israel by archaeologists to mean before Common Era, and I use that in the interest of becoming less Christocentric, and for the purposes of this particular subject matter, it seems appropriate. Merlin Stone has suggested using, before the discovery of agriculture as the most sort of watershed mark in a holistic view of history, but. So I'll be using that today unless I slip up and forget. So I think I'll go ahead and talk about Crete now, since time is moving on, unless anyone has any further questions. Great. Yeah, somebody will get the lights, that would be great. And most of the slides are vertical, so, horizontal rather, so we won't have this problem here. It shows the positioning of Crete down in the Mediterranean. It's considered that the isolation of Crete, again, what's so special about this culture and why it seems to me appropriate to begin this series with a look at the art of Crete is that because of its isolation in the Mediterranean, it did not suffer the defeat from the Indo-European patriarchal tribes until about 1500 BCE. So you've got a civilization that survived longest into the historic period. As such, the archaeological record is more complete, and additionally the society was more evolved and advanced and sophisticated. So it's also, again, down here way at the bottom, its culture, one of the reasons it was considered to be so advanced is that as it was situated there in the center of the Mediterranean, it acted as it was a leader. It is considered that it dominated the Mediterranean in the form of trade during the heyday of its wealth and its heyday, which was approximately 2000 BCE, and that as, in terms of operating as such a hub, it then collected culture and learned and grew from the cultures surrounding it in a way that enabled it to sort of pick up the best of everything and sort of evolve in its own interesting way. So that is what's special. Just as far as dates go, the beginnings of settlements on Crete. Some people think that the people came to Crete from Africa. Others have suggested that they came there from Sumer. So there's some debate about that particular subject. But what is of interest, when Crete was first excavated at the turn of the century by Arthur Evans, British archaeologist, who basically was following up a hunch from the Odyssey about this being a fabulous palace at Knossos there. One of the things that has been an anomaly to historians was the fact that the walls of the palaces, everything that they were coming up with, showed no fortification or armaments, unlike the other towns and forts on the Greek mainland. So again, it was an anomaly. The other thing that was unusual about it is that there's very little written record. The art, as you will see, is really quite fabulous, and they show just, highly sophisticated art, but not particularly interested in writing. So it was a bit of a mystery culture, and again, I think that it's explained more in the light of this knowledge of this period of the matriarchal strata of prehistory, that much of it begins to make sense. Just to bring in the legend of the lost Atlantis for a moment. I've been suggesting, like in my introduction, that a lot of these matriarchal societies had a bit of, what to us seems kind of utopian about them. They were quite different in character from, what this attributes that we associate with societies in the patriarchal era. But there is literal reason to believe that the demise of Crete was the actual source of the legend of the lost Atlantis. That legend has come down to us basically through Plato, who apparently got the legend from a relative of his, Athenian statesman by the name of Solon, S-O-L-O-N, who visited Egypt and picked up this, it's quite likely that he picked up this legend there of a huge island empire, city of great sophistication and a culture of heightened artistic capabilities and prowess, that had done steady trade with Egypt, probably more than any of the other surrounding countries, and then in a single day sank into the ocean and never was heard from again. Now, keeping in mind that these Egyptians had seen, and done business with the Cretan sea people and doing all of this trade and all of this stuff, suddenly not to be seen from again. This was a picture of the neighboring island of Crete, Thera, with the contemporary name Santorin. And you can see the kind of crescent bay there. That was at one time a 5,000-foot cone of a volcano that apparently erupted within, say, 50 years of the demise of Cretan civilization. And some people believe that it was responsible, literally, for the fall of Crete, either most likely by the fact that the ash covered the entire island, and so it destroyed their agricultural system. But as we'll see at the end of the lecture, there are probably some other factors involved in this that are highly significant as well. But in any event, the eruption of Thera is considered to have been 4 times as great as Krakatoa. So it would have been quite likely that this blast would have been visible on some level in Egypt. And to see this blast, and then suddenly they no longer, these Cretan emissaries, the traders, no longer come doing their trading. In any event, it's considered that this is very likely to have been the literal source of the legend of the lost Atlantis. And then again, what I suggested in my introduction is that on some kind of figurative level, I'm suggesting that there's this association as well. So here is the little town of Santorin. I guess it's kind of a tourist town. Probably some of you have been there, on the island of Santorin near Crete. And this is the bay. This is on the island of Crete. These are the ruins of the palace of Katosagros, which is on the eastern section of the island where they did most of the trade with Egypt. And this is not a very good slide. As you can see, it's out of focus, but it does give a bit of a vision of what the Crete looks like. It looks like California a lot to me. So it was initially very heavily forested, but they cut down all of the trees to build these ships that enabled their great trading fleets. And this is the ruins of the Palace of Phaistos here, which was the second largest of the major palaces that were excavated. It was also destroyed about 1450 BCE. And it's one of those vertical slides. This is the Palace of Hagia Traga in the foreground, and that's Mount Ida in the background. And Mount Ida is the mythical homeland or birthplace of Zeus, who was considered to be nursed in a cave there by different animals and whatever. So that would be obviously the change then to patriarchal religion with the advent of Zeus. But the Cretans generally, a lot of their worship was taking place out in nature, either in sacred groves or in caves. So Mount Ida is full of caves that are filled with different little votive offerings, marking them as sacred places. The little double axes, which we'll see later, and the bull's horns, which were also marking them as sacred places. So they did not actually build temples. And the implication here is of the worship of nature, and additionally that on some level there were a lot of shrines and little altars in people's homes and in the palaces, so that there was a kind of an individualistic and private aspect to the religion also. And here is the ruins of the Palace of Knossos, which is the most by far the largest city to be unearthed by, again, Arthur Evans. At its height, its population is considered to have been 80,000, and at its least was 40,000. And this shows the restoration that Evans began on it, so which has been somewhat controversial. Some people think that, change what we'll be seeing so that we can really see something visible, as opposed to a sort of a pile of rubble like we saw from the earlier slides. And then others think that in so doing he has destroyed some of the archaeological evidence that actually exists. But the implications of the about the social structure of the Cretan society are that it was not a strongly centralized entity, that again warfare was absent, that the status of women was extremely high, and likely that they were ruled in the form of a sort of a theocracy by a priestess queen through at least a certain period of history anyhow, possibly 1800 BCE. And that the reason that it maintained this kind of non-hierarchical, non-stratified, relatively that is, structure based on the kinship system, which was matrilinear, whereas those societies, say Sumer, that had already moved into a patriarchal organization, were more hierarchical, were organized in the hierarchical way for war, but the Crete had not made this kind of transition, and so it was based on the old kinship system rather than this kind of new stratification that's associated with warfare. And this is a drawing, not the actual restoration, but it's a drawing of what the restored wing of the place would have looked like. And you can see the little decorations up at the top. Those are called the horns of consecration, and those are meant to symbolize the horns of a bull, which was a sacred animal, and we'll be looking at that a lot later on in the lecture. And here is a drawing of what the courtyard and then the surrounding buildings looked like, of the palace and then the city. So that was the palace was like the center of the city. And that is the origin of the term labyrinth, as you can see. This is this kind of organic structure rather than building from some kind of a central design that buildings and different rooms are added as they are needed. And that is, as I say, it's the original term labyrinth, which means the house of the labyrinth or the double axe, which we'll see later, these little votive double axes. But the double axe was presumably sacred to these people because it enabled them to clear the land so effectively of all of the trees that enabled them to build these fleets, to have this really kind of fabulous culture based on trade. So you've got this labyrinth type design that was basically surrounding the central courtyard with the rooms added as they were necessary. And it's the palace itself, which is connected with the rest of the city. There were apparently 150 rooms in the palace, and it covered 5 acres, and the city covered 11 acres. And again, was totally lacking in fortification. Now this slide basically shows the engineering capacity of these people that was considered extremely high and hasn't really been matched by other cultures until periods that were 1,000 years later. But you can see how this little drainage system is set up so that the flow of the water, rainwater, collecting, running down the steps next to the rain, and then over here it's cut at right angles so that it's baffled on its way out to drain, so that would prohibit any kind of flooding or anything like that. And they had apparently flush toilets in the palace, and just all kinds of very sophisticated building techniques that did not really occur elsewhere at that time. And then this is a picture from the magazines where they stored a lot of their agricultural produce. They raised grapes and wine and olive oil, all of these things which they traded with the mainlanders for cereal products and different metals. They also traded their pottery and artwork with the mainlanders. And this shows, again, the kind of sophistication in the building of this palace. You can see the light coming in from the light shaft and light wells over to the right, which was extremely important. These pillars are considered to be quite distinctive in style to Crete. Those color combinations of this sort of rust color and then turquoise, which we'll be seeing a lot of later, are again characteristic of their style. And this is the throne room. You can see the throne there in the background, and here is a close-up of it. It's considered to be probably the oldest throne in Europe. It's built, made from gypsum, and there is that reconstructed fresco there surrounded by lilies and griffins who are considered to be signs of divine protection. and again restored by Arthur Evans. This is the entrance from the Queen's chamber into the King's chamber, and that's the dolphin fresco, and then you can see two different styles in the kind of design over the doorway, the rosettes and the spirals. And again, it's considered that their artistry was very much influenced by Egypt. We can take some looks later at some Egyptian work at the time. And also those the kinds of spiral motifs, the running spiral motifs, were then picked up about 1,000 years later, mysteriously enough, by the Celts in their own artistic tradition. Whether this is, and some people think that the origins of the Celts were Mediterranean, so that's possibly the reason for that. And this is that same entrance into the King's chamber from the Queen's room again. And just to show the detail of the work and how complex it was, this is a detail from a ceiling of a rosette that has been sculpted and painted, and is supposed to be indicative of what an entire ceiling was like at that point. And this is called the Flying Fish fresco. This was, again, you see a real kind of sense of play and playfulness that really characterizes the art of these people. And again, it puts me in mind to what Edmund Whitmont says about the return of the goddess would be an enhanced reverence and view of the validity of play, the play dimension, and pleasure, and those kinds of things. So it'll be a bit of a departure from the work ethic, which is pretty much pronounced in our society. So there is this kind of playful dimension to their artwork, and humor, and not taking themselves excessively seriously. And this particular fresco comes from that neighboring island of Thera, which the frescoes there were extremely well preserved by all of the lava deposits and stuff. So I could be wrong, but I'm not sure that this was even reconstructed by Evans or anybody else, that it was actually, I believe, preserved naturally that way by the lava deposits and ash. And here is this character, again from Thera, the fisherman, and he has this kind of interesting hairdo, which is basically a shaved head with a couple of long locks of hair on it. And again, these people seem to have a sort of a humor in the art, shows a kind of a humor of not taking themselves too seriously, perhaps, and that kind of a feeling is present in it. The hairdos actually remind me a lot of the currently what we'd call a punk rock hairstyle. So to me that, of course, is proof positive that the matriarchies are coming back into fashion again. And here with these two boys boxing, when my students out at JFK thought that they were girls, I frankly don't know. I think that you'll agree by the end of looking at this artwork that a lot of the figures look much more androgynous in a variety of ways. So this is, anyhow, it's two youths boxing, and again, look at the hairstyles with the shaved heads and that really long strands of hair there. This is there also, yeah.
They can all be seen in the museum in Athens. They're all restored, and they have a special room of their own.
Have you been there and seen these? Great.
In the Archaeological Museum.
Great. Just to read a quote of how the Cretan character has been described from the perspective of what's revealed in the art, said that they have shown to have a view of beauty, great taste and sophistication, love of pleasure, And their character has been described as a curious mixture of religious formalism and a real joie de vivre of a somewhat heartless and childlike nature. So that's a little bit of criticism implied there. I just throw that out whether people agree with it or not. And that their art is not unduly awed by the supernatural, hence this notion of self-mockery and the play dimension, which, for instance, if you look at some of the artwork from Ur, with these really large eyes. I don't know if anyone's familiar with those figures, but there's a sense, and there was huge amounts of human sacrifice apparently with some of those cultures, and you get a sense of, so much awe that it went against these people's self-interest, perhaps, in the, in terms of life preservation from human sacrifice. But you don't see that kind of spirit shown in the art of Crete. Just an aside at this point, it might be a good time to bring this up. Have any of you read The King Must Die by Mary Renault? Okay, I just want to bring this up now that for some reason, and as popularized by Mary Renault, Crete has a sort of a reputation for human sacrifice, and specifically sacrifice of the king, which is totally unfounded as far as the archaeological record goes. Up until 1974, which there's an article in a National Geographic where archaeologists believes that they may have found one instance of human sacrifice in Crete, way up in the mountains. And this was not something that was traditional and practiced. But presumably the succession of the king as a sort of a rotating office is meant to show basically the primacy of the queen and the queen priestess, and that the position of the consort or the king ruler was one that was not occupied for life, and that there were successors to it. But to view that as actual human sacrifice, it would just be like, Ronald Reagan stepping down eventually from office, that kind of thing, not, again, to be construed with sacrifice. And I think the fact that it has, is taking some of the mythology a little bit too literally from many of the cultures where they're talking about, they're having a mythology based on the birth and death of the sun. Again, for these cultures who were so primarily agricultural, this, the calendar was extremely important with the megalithic stone sites at Stonehenge and different places in the world for determining their planting seasons. And so then they have this accompanying mythology of the sun, the birth and the death of the sun, but really shouldn't be taken literally as such. And I think the fact that some people have it just acts to sort of discredit these kinds of religions as being kind of bloodthirsty and bloody. But as I say, I don't think that there's any reason to believe that they were. So, and here are a couple of oryx. Again, very kind of graceful execution and a real sort of a vivacity and a sense of the immediate, and using nature as a subject in a lot of their art as they did. And this is an Egyptian painting from the same period, and this was what they call that funerary art in Egypt, of the frescoes accompanying designs for the mummies and the different people into the hereafter, so that even though it was a sort of a death-oriented kind of thing, much of what they were really depicting was life and nature. But I think in the Cretans, as you can see, took this a little bit further with those really the continuous flow of their lines, whereas this tends to look slightly a little bit more static, and then also the dimension of humor that the Cretans brought specifically to their art. And there are a couple of other conventions which we'll get into later that the Cretans are considered to have borrowed from the Egyptians. And this is called the Bluebird fresco from Knossos itself. about 1500 BCE. And this is the side of a sarcophagus. And this, the figures on the right are depicted in red, and the figures on the left in white. And that is supposedly a scheme that they did derive from the Egyptians, so that the red figures are representing males and the white are representing females for the most part. And it's kind of considered to be a mystery as to what exactly is going on here. But
what one curious thing about that slide is that the one male here on the left is dressed as a woman.
Yeah, that's right. And going in the direction of the others.
And there's the double axe symbol here.
And one of the women on the left is dressed like the men on the right.
Good point. Good point. Right. Again, more on the subject of this androgyny that we were talking about earlier. And this is a close-up of that same slide.
What was the source of those slides? They were taken directly there, or from the museum?
Let's see, where you would, I assume that some of them are actually there, and then some are in a museum.
Sarcophagus about this big, and it's in the museum in Iraq.
That sarcophagus
All
is-
these, all these last group of 6 or 7 slides.
I see.
Thank you.
But like some of them, I would assume, like that lily room at Thera, that looks like an existing chamber that would exist on the island of Thera, I would assume.
No,
So
all
they
the-
transported
all
it.
Really?
the-
Huh,
All the
interesting.
frescoes from Thera have been restored, mostly finished in Athens,
In Athens.
and are in the archaeological
I
museum
see.
in Athens.
Aha, okay. And this is the libation bearers from Knossos. And just to point out that the fellows are wearing these kind of iron bands around their waists, which it's considered that this is in an attempt to basically girdle their waists so that they would have small waists. So there's again, on the lines of androgyny, something that we associate, this kind of emphasis on cosmetics and that kind of thing in our culture is really only associated with women, or has been primarily. Here was obviously employed by both. And so here is the character called possibly called the Prince of the Lilies, or the priest king figure, perhaps the consort of the queen priestess. Again, wearing one of these iron bands to make his waist small, and indeed it is, and a codpiece also. So there's an interest in kind of enhancing sexual characteristics, and we'll see this with the women's dress as well. Yeah.
How do you know that they're iron bands?
Question.
I don't know how they know that those are iron bands. I assume that they found some, and that's how it's known. I mean, just from looking
I
at
was
that.
wondering if it was maybe speculation that has gotten repeated so often, people are beginning to think that it is so, where in fact it may be speculation that it was iron or copper or some soft material like linen rolled up in a roll. Because you couldn't tell from a fresco.
No, you can't. That's why, as I say, I sort of assumed that that they found something like that. And this is a little fragment from Knossos that the archaeologists call La Parisienne, because they think that she's so modern and sophisticated looking and French. So. And here again, along the lines of accentuating the sexual characteristics, this is the dress of the more upper class women. Again, a sense of really elaborate coiffures there, different but just as elaborate as the men have. And then they're actually wearing boleros that expose their breasts. And we'll see more of this later. So you can, sort of take these kinds of things two ways. On the one hand, you could take this sort of positive view that this is a society that's very open about play, sex, pleasure, and that kind of thing. On the other hand, you could say this is a decadent culture that is ripe to fall, depending on how you want to look at it. So anyhow, here is this woman, again from with the exposed breasts from that sort of bolero costume. The figure on the left rather, is considered to be a priestess, and wearing the garb of robes that sort of show the inward journey, of the kind of cloistered inward journey of the spiritual path. And then sort of just like nuns today, I guess. And then the one on the right is the more upper class woman. And this depicts the much known art of bull leaping, which apparently was practiced in Crete in those central courtyards that we saw of the palace. And so again, it's just really a practice of literally taking the bull by the horns and somersaulting over the back of it. And so it's apparently practiced by both boys and girls. You see that red figure there would be a boy somersaulting over the back of the bull, and there's a girl ready to catch him, and then there is another girl on the left who's about to do this herself. And this is a little ivory figurine of a bull leaper. And this is called, again, you can see the really kind of almost uncanny craftsmanship. This is a rhyton, which is a container for libations shaped in the shape of a bull's head. Now, here is a quote from Arthur Evans about the importance of the bull in terms of their religious practices. I don't know if people are familiar with this term, chthonic, spelled C-H-T-H-O-N-I-C. It basically means the opposite of celestial. It's, of the earth, the underworld, and so some of the animals associated with it are snakes, bulls, these things that are very earthy, as opposed to the seraphim and the cherubim or doves that are more associated with celestial religions, although we will see doves associated with the Cretan goddesses. But that does seem to be the form of religious devotion of these more earth-worshipping kinds of peoples. And here is Arthur Evans' explanation of it. He says, "It is something to have heard with one's own ears the bellowing of the bull beneath the earth, who, according to primitive belief, tosses it with its horns. It was doubtless the constant need of protection against the petulant outbursts of infernal powers that explains the Minoan tendency to concentrate their worship on the chthonic aspects of their great goddess, wreathed with serpents as the lady of the underworld." And it does appear, again, here are the horns of consecration, which were put on the walls around the palace and actually lined some of the temple, well, not the temple, but the palace chambers of the Hall of the Double Axe. And there's a little hole in the center of this, between the two horns, which it's considered held the labyrinth or the double axe. And so in addition to its function in cutting down trees, it is believed they didn't apparently perform human sacrifice, but it does appear that they did perform quite a bit of sacrificing of the bulls, unfortunately. So that is possibly with the double axe here. And the labyrinth is something that you're probably familiar with, has been brought back in contemporary times as a symbol of radical feminism and lesbianism. So there plenty of them around now as a symbol from this older period. And these are like small votive labyrinths there, and the bull's horns that in this case are earrings.
Wouldn't the bull be a patriarchal symbol?
Well, it's interesting. I'll sort of get into that a little bit later, but because of its association with virility, you mean? Yeah, it's considered that the bull was a symbol of virility, but it's kind of like it was a symbol of possibly as a consort of the goddess. So it's a symbol of the masculine, not in a state of supremacy, but in possibly a consort status. And then the bull's horns are frequently associated with the crescent moon in a lot of the mythology. And so many people interpret this that in our culture, there's a frequent identification of the feminine with the lunar, and that the masculine is associated with the solar. And many people believe that in the early periods in prehistory, in the matriarchies, the lunar was worshipped as masculine, and that which was more primary of the solar was considered feminine and the female principle, thus a kind of a reverse. I'll get into that question because it's quite interesting a little bit later when I talk a little bit about the myth of the Minotaur and the,
I was just going to say, astronomically, it was the age of Taurus.
Right, that's right. And that is frequently associated with devotion to the earth and the goddesses. But you're right, that it is considered to have been a symbol of virility in that way. Did you want to say something also?
Well, another explanation for the lapis is that it's also a form of a butterfly, and that it's a symbol of regeneration.
Right. Yeah. That it looks like a butterfly. And here are one of these caves where these bull's horns and labyrinths were found as votive offerings.
So go up into the caves and use them as a instrument.
I think it's more as a tourist attraction, actually. Yeah, I don't know. Some of you, it sounds like have been to Crete, and I obviously haven't. So
I think in the more rural areas that the caves are sometimes used as a matter of devotion, but certainly the shrines are. The people, they still in the rural areas go around riding on donkeys and walking through the mountains. They aren't the way people are in the city here. It's a blessing that there are places that are still quite unchanged.
yeah. So anyhow, this is this little cave at a place called Amnios, which is actually not up on Mount Ida, but more down close to a seaport. And again, there is this old myth that Zeus was born in one of the caves of Crete. And so here is one of a very old image of one of the Cretan goddesses with a dove on her head. And there is this very old, and so this is a departure from that whole chthonic element of the association with bulls and snakes, but with the dove is one of the most ancient symbols of that it's considered the most ancient symbols of the goddess as an epiphany in the form of doves, and that this has then carried into patriarchal religion. It's sort of carried over to the association with Aphrodite and the dove, and carried over into Judaism and Christianity, where the dove is considered an epiphany of God. And then here again are some early images of the Cretan goddess, and that's called the Tree of Life posture there, or that's one interpretation of it anyhow. And again, with the crown with the doves on her head.
she's got that thing around her waist. The women wore those too.
Yes, the women wore those too, and this fellow does also. Now this character here is considered to be in a, you can see it looks like a, what we would call a military salute. But on Crete, this was considered to be, it would be a posture similar to our prayerful one, that this is a posture of reverence and devotional worship. And so here is the object of that worship. There's the boss or whatever, the Cretan snake goddess. Now, I have heard that some people believe that they don't know the name of this goddess. I don't know, Mara, if you don't know of the name. And then I've heard Betty Smith recently, a Jungian analyst from Los Angeles, say that the goddess of the Cretans was Rhea, who is the mother of Zeus, the mother of Demeter. So that would fit in a little bit with that whole mythological thing of Zeus having been born in a cave in on Crete. But yeah.
I was wondering about, that like the dove on the head.
Pardon me?
I was wondering about the dove on the head.
Oh, that is not a dove on her head. That is a panther. So, which is a symbol of rule and power. But the others had doves on their heads.
Okay, well, which came first? Like,
The others were older, the dove.
But Salket in Egypt also has this shape on her head.
Right.
Some kind of family.
Yeah, that I think is a
that older than
scorpion.
these? That's a scorpion. Yeah. Is that older than these? Or?
It's a little bit older than these, yeah. I believe that that's about 2000 BC. Now those, this one here is considered to be approximately, let's see, those other ones that we looked at go back as far as 2600 BCE, so those would be older than Salket. And this one would be probably newer than Salket. This little figurine is only about a foot high, and again, the exposed breasts here emphasizing fertility, and the snake in each hand, again, as this image of the chthonic devotion to the earth, and also regeneration because of the fact that the snake molted and lost its skin. This was a powerful image of regeneration. The seven-tiered skirt is probably goes back to the underworld descent of Inanna that was supposed to take place in 7 levels, and so that's probably what it's referring to. And again, it looks like she's got one sort of a tight band around her waist. I don't know if it's the same thing or not. Yeah.
I wanted to say about the goddess, there were different names in different places, and there was, I think, some of us think the theory that there was the great goddess, the great mother, she had many names in different places, and as time changed, the names changed. And Rhea may have been included in Aphrodite, may have been included in Sappho, and I talk about them with you. And Zeus was comparable in so I'll talk about that too.
Okay.
But I think there are different names, and actually there is a written script for Crete. Linear A comes prior to the Messianic takeover, and Linear B talks about Our Lady, but the reference may have been to Our Lady, and two goddesses, and I couldn't know the other goddess, but we don't have a specific name in the early period.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, that basically coincides with what my research has shown also. But one thing, and this is interesting as a preface then to Mara's talk next week on the Eleusinian mystery rites, where as you say, this is just the great goddess here, and whereas in Eleusis, which is a slightly later development, you have the underworld aspect of the goddess in the form of Persephone, the daughter, and the green world aspect of the goddess in the form of Demeter, her mother. Here, in a sense, they're both united in one person, and you can almost even see that a bit in the physiognomy and the whole presence of this actual goddess, that it's been described as both fierce and seductive at the same time, and so that might, in a sense, then be reminiscent of this more definitely matriarchal era where they were, had not been sort of divided up into two, and then later under the Greek pantheon where the goddess had really already lost power, that it becomes divided up into many, many goddesses that each have some particular function. But again, you could see that as a sort of a fragmentation in terms of feminine consciousness or power as well. But anyhow, some names of goddesses, in addition to the ones that Mara mentioned, that have been associated with Crete are one called Britomartis, that's associated with Artemis, one called Dictyna, which is spelled Dyktynnna, and then Ariadne, which means very holy maiden, who was carried off by Theseus, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And, possibly again like Persephone, she's the maiden who was carried off and mourned as a vegetation goddess, prior to the advent then later of the sort of dying gods motif, that it's the death and resurrection of God that is responsible for the generation of the natural world, or agriculture specifically. And then Lato, the mother of Apollo and Artemis, is also somewhat associated with Crete. So
what material was that made of?
that is called faience, and it's a certain treatment of a glaze to clay.
Oh, so it was ceramic.
Mm-hmm.
I thought maybe it was that one has to remember.
No, this one is ivory with gold, and it was actually not found specifically on Crete, but they think that it's of Cretan origin. And so again, you see the gold snakes coiling up her arm.
Where is that figure exist?
Have you seen that?
I think it's in Boston.
Boston. And this is another one of these faience goddess figurines, about a foot tall, and covered with the serpents as a symbol of regeneration.
Do you know where that one is?
It's in Heraklion, in the Archaeological Museum in Heraklion.
And here is the linear B that Mara mentioned. Now this script was decoded. I mentioned that there is not a lot of writing found on Crete to give people much of a idea of their history. This was deciphered in 1952 and has been found to be a primitive form of Greek that was probably brought to Crete by the Mycenaeans after their invasion in about 1450 BCE. And yeah, it's interesting, you probably heard this term Minoan Crete and Minos this and Minos that, and in actuality, what is termed Minoan Crete is not Minoan Crete, because the term Minos was found on this particular in this kind of script, which has later been determined to be a form of Greek, and so is not like indigenous Cretan script. And so it's considered now that Minos was actually one of the Mycenaean rulers from Crete, and not from this earlier period after the fall of Crete, and not from this earlier period that we've been looking at. So that's linear B.
Almost all of the literature on the subject of the early Palace period refers to these people as Minoan
Right.
civilization.
Right, I think
Almost all of it.
Yeah, it
And
does.
they refer to the Cretans as being of the archaic period.
Archaic.
Archaic
Huh.
in Crete.
That's interesting. And then here is that script which is called Linear A, and as you can see, it's little pictographs. That's considered to be the earliest form of printing in the world. It's also called the Phaistos disc. It was found in the Palace of Phaistos. Now, it actually has been deciphered by the radical anthropologist Barry Fell, but it is not recognized. His interpretation of it, or breaking of the code, is not recognized yet by academia, and he has related it as to an early form of Hittite. And translated it to be a form of prayers where people are advised how to take auguries from the flight of birds. And it's quite interesting and beautiful, actually, his translation, but as I say, it's not academically recognized. And again, just looking at some of the beauty, yeah? Does anyone have a question?
What auguries do?
Oh, auguries? Well, that would be like an omen, right. So taking an omen from the flight of birds, which, as I say, people have been doing that for years. And in the Odyssey and the Iliad and stuff, a lot of times when different birds appear, it's considered to be, an approach of certain god or goddess. And again, this is from the mainland of Greece, but considered that it's likely to be from Crete. And you can see sort of a relief of hammered gold depicting the capture of a bull. Looks like this person is strapping the bull's leg to their own leg. So these people had a lot of courage when it came to bulls, that's for sure. And this is an interesting figure that, again, is found on the mainland, but is considered to be probably Cretan. And I, again, sort of associate this with the Eleusinian theme of the mother Demeter on the left, the daughter Persephone on the right, and then the small male infant that's called Triptomenus, I think, in Eleusis. But just that sort of dyad where, again, some people feel that this is indicative of the fact that, people were not aware of the role of paternity at this point, that you don't see too many male-female pairs, and child, for instance. And then here, these are considered to be very spectacular little seal engravings, again showing the influence of the Egyptian pictographs and stuff. But these have been, apparently they're very tiny, they've been hammered onto semi-precious stones. And, what can I say about the artistic qualities? It's just really, they're quite charming and naturalistic, and the fact that it's been done on such small stones, again, shows a real heightened crafts ability. And then this is a little depiction of from Egypt around 1500 BC, showing the Cretan emissaries bringing in their crafts to the Egyptian courts, again emphasizing that association. And then these are the gold signet rings. This one is believed to be showing an epiphany of the goddess to two priestesses wearing the tiered skirts, and one of them is shaking a tree in the sacred arbor of some kind. And so, there's some hypothesis of what's going on here. And again, the association that a lot of mystery rites were practiced in the sacred groves. And here's another one. This time the goddesses and the priestess heads are replaced, they think, by a swarm of bees, which I personally find very unaesthetic, but there it is.
I'll talk, the bees is a name, the priestesses of the goddess are called bees. It's like these little flowers.
Aha. Okay, so there's method in this. Good, I'm glad to hear that. And this is a beautiful form of the decorated pottery. And this is another beautiful piece, rock crystal libation jug. And then this is a Renaissance painting of the myth, and just getting back to that discussion we had a little earlier about the bull. This is a depiction, this painting is a Renaissance depiction of the Theseus and Ariadne myth. And just to go quickly into that myth a little bit here, the story is that the king and queen, Minos, the king, and Pasiphae, the queen of Crete, that Pasiphae took some kind of an unnatural sexual passion for a bull. That had been a gift of Poseidon to Minos, and that from this unnatural passion, a child was born that was called a minotaur, half man and half bull, that lived in the center of the labyrinth. And then Theseus, who was an Athenian youth brought to Crete as one of the bull leapers or whatever, made some kind of romantic liaison with the priestess Ariadne, who was also a daughter of Pasiphae and Minos, and that she guided him to the center of the labyrinth, where he slew the Minotaur, and then you see him making off with Ariadne on the ship later on, and then he winds up dropping her on the island of Naxos, and then he sort of takes off to become basically the patriarchal hero. And I just want to give my own quick interpretation of the possible meaning of this myth at this point. That my interpretation of this is that, this shows basically the advent of the patriarchy, and that while there is evidence that, under the more matriarchal cultures, that men did not have, that they did occupy like a higher place than say women have in the patriarchy, that I believe that as, say, fatherhood was largely unknown, that there was probably a loss of self-esteem, that there was some loss of place, and that with this discovery and the advent of patriarchy, there was a sort of a rage at the former place of males in the society, which may have been depicted in the form of this bull, or half man, half bull. And that to see Theseus going to the center of the labyrinth and slaying this figure is reminiscent to me of that poster I've seen in women's bookstores, where you have the woman facing this dragon, and she says, my passivity is something, she's facing it with a sword in her hand, she says, my passivity is something that I will slay with this sword. And so I think that this is the sort of new patriarchal male slaying the role of the sort of male consort, sexual virile figure in the matriarchy, and then walking off. And by the same note, one could well ask, what it was about the figure of the golden calf that was so upsetting to Moses a couple of hundred years later. And again, I'm suggesting that it's the same thing, that the golden calf shows the matriarchal origins of Judaism, and that Moses was sort of leading the way out of in a similar way that Theseus was here.
Who painted that?
Piero di Cosimo. And okay, so then we have the fall of Crete at approximately 1450 BCE. I've suggested that one of the reasons could have been the ash from the explosion of Thera that occurred at the same time. And another reason could have been that the society had overgrown itself, and that began a certain more stratification and hierarchy, which then resulted in internal revolt. That's another theory. And then another is defeat from the outside, the Mycenaeans. And this is the fortress of Mycenae. You can see that, from the same period, it is a heavy fortress. Apparently, the heaviness of the fortresses there gave rise to the myth of the Titans, that later Greeks thought, who were these people that built these incredibly thick forts? They must have been giants and titans. Well, indeed, it was the Mycenaeans who presumably, so they certainly settled Crete eventually, and could very well have just sacked the place, and they suffered a military defeat at their hands. And then this is called, and so you have a whole different culture here. These are the more patriarchal cultures, with the emphasis on, obviously warfare. This and burial places. This is called the Treasury of Atreus, who, as you may remember, was the father of Agamemnon and Menelaus, Agamemnon being the king of Mycenae on the Greek mainland. And this is considered to have been one of the wealthiest of the tombs, full of swords and different armors and a lot of wealth and looting. And again, the Cretans they had common burials, so they were not so much interested in concerns of like life after death and having a lot of wealth to take into the afterworld. So this is all, presumably, quite a different culture that replaced that. And this is the fortress at the Peloponnesus that was the home of the Greek hero Nestor from the Iliad. You may remember him from the Iliad. And again, the thickness of these walls and fortresses are almost uncanny, and is quite a departure from the. And this is one of the armors with the boar tusk helmet that was found in one of the tombs. This is a death mask, hammered gold. When the archaeologist Schliemann found it, he thought that he had found the death mask of Agamemnon, but it's too late for that. Too early for that, so it was somebody else. And so here we have just a little Star Wars defense thing, just as showing about 3,000 years later, that we've really taken the business of arms and stuff into a heightened technological age. And what I, of course, am hoping is that we can have a raised Atlantis, with the finding of these interest in the goddess and to different forms of culture to really meet our needs and do what we can to save the planet Earth from some kind of terrible demise. But anyhow, I think that the return of the goddess is no accident at this particular period in history, and I'm hoping that she's here with good news in all kinds of ways.
Transforming that Black Widow.
Right. Yeah. So anyhow, that pretty much concludes my talk. Anybody have any questions about anything or comments that they would like to make on this material? Yeah.
I have some questions and comments, but I'll be really brief. Is there any evidence whatsoever, other than the speculations of modern-day patriarchal archaeologists at the turn of the century and modern-day feminists, that the men in matriarchal societies didn't know about paternity? Is there any evidence at all?
No, it's largely speculative, based on contemporary matrilinear groups who do exist in the world. Some in Micronesia and different indigenous tribal groups that are matrilinear, and some of which say that they do not know that that the moon is the father of these children and that kind of thing. So that it is largely speculative. But based on that.
I have other questions, but I'll ask you later, because since it's 12, there might be people who want to go.
Sure, yeah, if anybody, needs to go. Yeah.
I just wanted to make one comment about the labyrinth and its use in the cutting of the trees and the sacrifice of the bulls. What we've had so far is so much patriarchal scholarship that doesn't have this distinction between prehistory as the time of the goddess and then history as the time of the patriarchal past societies, so that it's fudged. All the data gets fudged together, and I think the sacrifices come in relatively late, probably in the patriarchal period, but we don't have clear evidence because those research questions haven't been asked. And the stripping of the lands, all the trees, and they were used, they did use the labyrinth to clear the land for agriculture, which was their way of life, and so it was a good tool for them. But the entire cutting down of the trees, I don't think was just for their ships. The clearing of the trees was for the smelting of the metal ores. So they cleared all, they stripped Grease's trees too, and cypress, and so I think the destruction of the trees came during later. I don't know about the sacrifice of the bull, but apparently that was later Poseidon brought the bull. And I think the sacrifices of the bull in the Eleusinian mysteries came in very late and were for Poseidon. So I think, we shouldn't conflate was to occur. The literature and research does, but it doesn't use the feminist distinction between the mother tongues, the early period, and the later tongues, and the information that's mixed up. Helps us clarify that it hasn't been taken as a research tool carefully. So I'm not certain, but those are my hypotheses.
Oh, that's interesting.
I want to say thank you to Sally.
Well, thank you all for coming, and I hope that you will come to subsequent talks and get different perspectives, in more ways than one, different interpretations of history and prehistory, and as well different approaches, the ritual for Candlemas, and as well Mariam Baker's closing ceremony in which she'll be